Aspire leaders and Teach Better family, thank you so much for joining again. If you are watching on YouTube, you see a very familiar face to the Aspire to Lead podcast, someone who is a dear friend, but also an amazing leader, author. She does it all. Allyson Apsey, thank you so much for being on the podcast once again.
Oh, thank you. I would say, first and foremost, I am a learner. And I feel like anytime I get to spend with you, Josh, I get to learn and grow as a professional, but also as a person. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness, those are such kind words. And it has been just amazing as far as getting to know you better, seeing you in person at the Teach Better conferences, seeing you speak. I mean, you are such a joy to be around. And I love having you on the podcast. And then also, thank you so much for being a contributor for the book. I know I've thanked you, but I want to do it, in front of the audience too, of just how much your personal touch to my project has meant to me. It was amazing to have your voice in that book.
Oh, that was a huge honor. So thank you for inviting me.
Yes. So let's talk about your latest project, your new book with co-author George Kuros, who also has been on the podcast several times. But what makes a great principal is such a beautiful title and something that I think is so perfect for this podcast. Obviously, the podcast was created for aspiring and current leaders, and principals are all over this country listening, but then also there's a lot of folks that want to be a principal and don't even know what that means. So before we kick off the conversation, I would love for you just to share a little bit about yourself, Allyson, because I know you've been on the podcast several times, and maybe some folks have heard of what you've done in the past, but you've also transitioned away from the campus and are doing some phenomenal things around the country too. So will you just give us a little update?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Michigan and was an educator in Michigan for most of my career. In fact, I spent 19 years as a school principal of all levels. So high school, junior high, and elementary. And a couple years ago, my family moved from Michigan to Georgia. And in that process, what was my side hustle, like writing on my blog and writing books and traveling and speaking, became my full-time work. So now for the past 2 years, I'm traveling, working from home sometimes, but doing a lot of travel. I just shared with Joshua that I think since January 1st, I've spent 104 nights in a Marriott property. So we're talking about all the points that I'm racking up. But it just provides such an incredible lens on education across the country. So I learned a ton as an educator in Michigan, as a school leader. And like I said, I am a learner first, always. But being able to see like schools from literally New York to California and to be in them and working with teachers, working with principals, it just makes me so passionate about this project and this book that we have co-authored, George and I, but then also with 15 incredible contributing authors. So I'm so excited to be able to share it with you. This is what it looks like. What makes
I
a great
love the
principal.
cover. Love the cover, by the way. As a
Thank
visual
you.
person, I remember you posting on social media some different variations, and I'm so happy with what you chose for the final product because that was the one I wanted you to choose.
Thank you. Thank you. This was a real collaboration.
Yeah.
Paige Kuros, George's wife, also works with Impress authors
Mhm.
and was instrumental in the design also. And I think like George's kids gave us some guidance.
Very
So
cool.
yeah, that was a collaboration.
That's awesome. So I want to dive into the book because I mean it's such a huge resource. I've seen so many people with the book in hand post on social media on just what a wonderful resource it is. And so I want to know kind of behind the scenes why George and yourself came together to create this resource for educational leaders.
Yeah. So actually, George does a good job sharing the story, so I'll try to do it justice. But George wrote some books with
Yeah.
contributing authors called Because of a Teacher. And those books are like chicken soup for the educator's soul. They are just beautiful compilations of incredible stories and strategies from educators. So there's Because of a Teacher 1 and Because of a Teacher 2. And a couple years ago, George said, "Hey, what if we do like a variation of this for principals?" And of course, like if George asks you, "Do you want to collaborate on something?" The answer is like, "I'll think about it." No, I'm just kidding. The answer was like immediately yes. And so And then he says I like bugged him about it over the course of like the next year or so, which I mean, I wasn't going to let it drop. So it was a brilliant idea and I wanted to be part of the project. So I did say, hey, what are we thinking about with this? And it wasn't until he read, I'm pulling this out, but he read my book, Leading the Whole Teacher, that like it
Brilliant book.
became, oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm so proud of this work. But there are 6 pillars
Yep.
in leading the whole teacher, the 6 pillars of the whole teacher. And he texted me, he's like, I love this book. And George tells me what he thinks. Like he tells all of us what he thinks. So
Mhm.
if he says, I love this book, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like, I'd call him my personal Simon Cowell because, on American Idol, if Simon Cowell gave you a compliment, like it
You
wasn't
run with
fluff. You run with it. Yeah.
it.
So what he says he appreciates about leading the whole teacher is that like I weave in stories with research. And then we talk about like how might we apply this? And he's like, okay, that's what I envision for what makes a great principal. He's like, I can tell stories. Like George,
Mhm.
he tells stories in person amazingly. Like when he speaks, it's incredible. And when he writes, like you can totally hear even like his Canadian accent when you're reading his writing. And he's like, all right, he's like, I'm gonna tee it up and then you're gonna take it and base it in research. So we did research around effective principal practices. We looked across actually the entire world at different principal standards, and we used that to develop the 5 pillars of effective school leaders.
Mhm.
So George introduces each of the 5 pillars. I back it up with like where do we come up with this? What research backs it? Sharing some stories and practical strategies. And then we have 3 incredible contributing authors for each of the 5 pillars. So that's kind of the backstory about how this book came to be.
Awesome. So I want to touch on a few pieces. I guess there's like some key elements that are embedded in the book. And so, for our aspiring and current leaders, I know that there's a piece in there that you talk about like a clear emphasis of what truly matters within that position as
Mm-hmm.
far as being a principal. And I love this as kind of our starting point for this conversation because I think a lot of times we have a perception, especially not being in the role, and then we get in the role and we're like, oh snap, that's not what I thought it was, or what I held as far as a belief of what matters is actually not true for this campus or for this district. So I'm
Right.
curious on like how you and George came about, creating this what truly matters for a principal, and if you wouldn't mind just sharing your thoughts on this specific topic.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a good point because as I work with principals, what I hear from them is like, I'm putting out fires.
Yep.
I am taking parent complaints, student behavior issues, staffing issues, like filling vacancies that we have. Like, I'm running around trying to solve all the problems of the world. I have no time to do the work that only I can do.
Yep.
And the other interesting part of what you said is we recognize that what it takes to effectively run a school campus varies from community to community for various reasons.
Yep.
And it even varies, like what that looks like is going to vary dependent on like the characteristics and the personality of the person who's running the school. So the thing that I love about this like compilation is this is not like, hey, go run a school like Allyson Apsey did, or
Right.
go run a school like George Couros did. But it's instead looking at these 5 pillars and then having contributing authors come in and share from a student perspective and a
Mhm.
teacher perspective and another leader's perspective of what does this pillar mean? What could this look like in a school environment? What are some things to think about associated with the pillar? Because as I coach leaders, I recognize the challenge. Like there's only so many hours in the school day. And we were just talking about as principals, we were working, 70, 80 hours a week. I probably still work 70 or 80 hours a week, but that's of my own doing, not it's, just in the workhorse nature that I have.
Sure.
But there's no more time. So what we really have to think about is how can we use our time differently? Like we
Yep.
even think about how can we use 10% of our time differently? One of the principles that a new principal I'm coaching, we talk about where can you gather up 10 minutes of your day and use that to get into classrooms. Use that for some proactive planning and to kind of just stop this cycle and trend of being so reactive. I think it definitely got worse during COVID, that we were reacting to our circumstances. And I almost see, like, with principals, that like our addiction to like our devices or our walkies, of it's almost like muscle reflex or muscle instinct to be constantly checking something. And what we're encouraging aspiring leaders or current leaders to do is to sit back, breathe, pause. Everything will be okay. Take a few minutes and apply some practices associated with one or more of these 5 pillars.
I've never wanted to throw something more than my walkie-talkie.
I don't blame you. I wanted to throw principals walkies that I've been visiting their school.
Oh yeah, it's such a nuisance. I mean, obviously there's for emergencies and whatnot, it's vital. But man, parents coming in, you're having a really serious conversation, it's just going off and all constantly, or you're trying to have a conversation with a teacher or on an evaluation. Like, it just seemed like whenever the time was for it not to go off, it always went off constantly.
Yes.
And it was such a nuisance. And so I totally agree with everything you're saying. It's so easy to get caught up, even just with like email. I leave my office, I come back, and I'd have 100 emails sitting there waiting for me to respond to. So that's not the number one thing on the list as far as a principal is email. It shouldn't be. But you could easily get trapped into your front office if you aren't being intentional about your time, like you said, and really diving into what's important. So I'm so glad you guys have this. I really wanted to talk about the 5 pillars real quick, because you've referenced it a few times, Allyson. And so obviously that's the backbone of your book. So if you wouldn't mind, not that we need to like do a deep dive on all 5 pillars, but what are the 5 pillars? And if you wouldn't mind just kind of highlighting, why those are so essential to be a great principal.
Yeah. And of course, there's overlap between the pillars, and there's purposefulness and why we started with one particular pillar and ended with one. But the first pillar is relationship builder. Mm-hmm. The second is continuous learner. The third is talent cultivator. The fourth is resource maximizer. And the fifth is visionary.
Nice.
And so I'll just talk a minute about, like, we chose relationship builder to go first because that's the building strong, trusting, positive relationships is like, if we don't do that first, none of the rest matters. And it doesn't mean that I need to be the BFF of all of my staff members. In fact, if relationship interferes with honesty and candor, it's a friendship. It's not a work relationship. So we need to be careful about that. But we certainly can have relationships where people trust us, where people value us, where they know they are valued. And that has to absolutely come first. And the pillar we put last is visionary, because all of these things need to be in place in order to co-create a vision and an action plan for your school. And I love Beth Huff and Shelley Burgess's quote from Lead Like a Pirate, that is like, people are much less likely to tear down things that they help create. And it is so true. And the vision for the school, the mission, how we are going to live that vision every day needs to be something that's co-created, and there needs to be strong, trusting relationships first.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's a people business. I mean, it's an industry that you have to, especially in the principal position. I was just thinking about this the other day. Someone had said something on of all things, a sports podcast, about like understanding when people are just essentially being fake or giving you a load of BS, right? And they're saying that, of course, this is in every industry. And I was just thinking, as far as an educational leader, like, that is so important to be able to read people and to, pick up on the nonverbals, be able to communicate effectively. And I mean, because you're having thousands of conversations a day with your students, your teachers, and your parents. So that relationship builder, I'm so glad that that's number one, because I couldn't think of another thing that's more important than that first pillar. So with that, Allyson, would you mind just highlighting one more pillar? Obviously, like I don't want you to go through all five because we'll be here for a full hour if we did that. But I definitely want to dive into at least one more for you to highlight within the framework that you've established.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk. I mean, I do want to talk about all of them because
We
I'm so
can if you
passionate
want. Let's
about
go.
all of them. But I know I have to talk really fast. So continuous learner. I love how in the book George talks about our job as leaders to learn about our community
Hmm.
and for our community and with our community. And that's so important. And one of the reasons why this like just speaks so loudly to me is because I get to work with teachers and principals all the time during professional learning. And guess what happens? I love you, principals. I was you. This was me. So this is no judgment. But
Sure.
guess what happens when I'm leading professional learning with a group of teachers? They're into it. Of course they are, right? Like we are learning together. We're growing together. The principal walks in, and what is the principal doing? Just can you guess, Joshua?
Probably not engaging.
Yes, the principal is interrupting with the walkie noise
Yeah.
or on their phone, maybe both of their phones, or on their email, pipes up, real quick to maybe answer a question and then is back into whatever else is happening. Important other things are happening 100%. But it is so important as a leader to learn with your staff, with
Totally.
your teachers. Yeah. That's one of the best ways to also build relationships. It's one of the best ways to cultivate talent. And when we talk about the third pillar, which is talent cultivator, we're talking about cultivating individual talent, but also collective talent and tapping into the power of the collective efficacy. But also, it's like that chicken or egg question: what has to come first? Like, does self efficacy have to come before collective efficacy, where we feel like we can take action that will help get the desired results? And I love that in each of these we have stories from teachers who share like this is how it was to work in an environment where there was a really great principal who had a strength in this area of talent cultivating or continuous learner. And then the fourth pillar is resource maximizer. And the brilliant Brad Gustafson is a principal, yes, in Minnesota. And he
Shout
shares
out to Minnesota.
he shares a story about like rethinking a budget that he had inherited and just
Mhm.
kept using year after year without really thinking about how can we align our resources with our vision and mission of our school. And I did the same exact thing. Like I would maybe up the allocation for each teacher or like mess with the budget a little bit each year, but I never like kind of threw it out and then looked at like how could we reallocate these funds in a way that makes sense for today's learners, not learners from 40 years ago when this budget framework was first developed. So
Sure.
it is robust. I call this book a conference, a leadership conference in a book,
Love it.
because you have like George with his powerful, witty, so smart keynote, and then I come in with the research. Um, of course, try to be powerful and witty too,
Just
but
as equal. Just as equal,
okay,
Allison.
okay, all right. And then we have these breakout sessions from teachers and a student even
Mhm.
and other leaders to talk about like how does this look in practice. Like it is beautiful, and so much so that I've had people who are reading it contact me and be like, okay, Elson, I need a study guide to go along with this just to help me process an action plan based upon all the ideas and strategies that I'm learning from this book.
Oh, I bet. Huge shout out to Brad. I've actually seen him in action at his campus in Minnesota. So
Oh,
huge fan of him, and then also got a wonderful chance to have dinner with him and his wife and Todd Neslony. So
oh,
um,
that's fantastic.
he is an amazing leader, and so glad that he's a voice in your impactful book. I want to talk about real quick because you went through the five pillars, but you had talked about several times about the students and the teachers and the leaders that are the voice in this book. And I'm so curious because I think it's, for our educational leaders that are listening, like it's so impactful to have those voices embedded in the decision making on your campus. And I love that you've also done that with your book. And so curious with like the strategies that they have provided, because I know there's probably some practical things that they've, embedded into their stories for our leaders, but curious if you have one that's jumping out to you as far as something that you wanted to highlight within the voices that were added to the book.
Yeah. I mean, I'm even like just looking down the chapter titles,
Probably so
and
many.
there's so many.
Yeah.
Like when we explored the pillar of talent cultivator, there is a teacher. Her name is Abby Ramos Stanitz. I need to talk to her about how to pronounce her last name, but
we'll go with it, Allyson.
Okay. Sorry, Abby, if I mispronounced that, but she's amazing. I follow her
Yes.
on TikTok, and just so many great ideas about teaching ELA. But the title of her chapter is "Shine Your Light and Get Out of My Way." Like, is that not even just brilliant?
It's perfect
in itself. Yes, and that's what we need to do as leaders. Like, we need to shine the light on these pockets of excellence, and then let teachers go and just get out of the way. CJ Reynolds, I know you know CJ.
Well, he's going to be next. So you're this week, Allyson, but CJ Reynolds is actually the guest for next week.
What? Oh, yeah. You're going to have so much fun with him. Talk about witty and smart and talented.
Brilliant.
Yes. I just was on the phone with him yesterday, and talking about some of the work that he's going to do this summer, which is so exciting. I'm like, CJ, like, reread your chapter and what makes a great principal, because it is brilliant. Yep. And I love his opening quote in the chapter. So there's CJ.
Real rap with Reynolds.
Yes. His chapter title is "Take a Breath, Close Your Eyes, and Go for It."
Nice.
And he's talking about the power of having a leader as a continuous learner. And he had a principal who was always learning and looking to learn from his teachers too. And CJ, he's a risk taker, right? Like,
very much so.
He might do something and then ask for forgiveness after, rather than asking permission.
Definitely.
But his opening quote is, "Your life needs a few hold your nose and jump moments." And it's a Jeff Foxworthy quote. And doesn't that like describe like CJ perfectly?
Yes.
But I mean, and then we had in Relationship Builder, we had a student. Her name is Taylor Tiemann, and she's actually the daughter of Amber Tiemann. If you know Amber, she's a fantastic educational leader in Texas. Taylor is now a first-year teacher, but she wrote her chapter from the perspective of a high school student. And she talks about the power of having a high school principal who sees you as a person first and a student second, and the impact that had on Taylor and her classmates. So just so many powerful stories with these contributing authors. If you can tell, like, I'm so proud of them. And like through the editing process, like, I mean, every time I went through the book and edited it, I was texting George, like, "George, this is so good." And he's like, "Just good?" I'm like, "George, do you know what so good means?" Like, it is amazing. And it's actually exciting because when I share like my own books, like, I'm going to be humble, right? But I don't have to be humble with this book because I didn't write it all. Like, it's written by all of these amazing educators from around, like, the country. And so I'm just so proud to be able to elevate their voice and share their work. And of course, proud to co-author this book with George.
Oh, George is amazing. Yeah, you're making me feel old though with Amber's daughter being a first-year teacher. Goodness, Amber's been on the podcast before. I met her several times at conferences in Texas, so she's phenomenal too. But I can't believe her daughter's a first-year teacher. Goodness, that's amazing. So let's talk about Allyson. You not only have phenomenal books, you've talked about two of them today, but you also speak quite a bit all over the country, and you're working with districts. But I also know that you are an amazing keynote speaker for district kickoffs or at convocations. So curious on kind of what you talk about during these convocations to get the school year off, and for those who are listening that want to bring you in and do that same thing for their district to get everyone excited. What are some of the different topics that you like to cover for the beginning of the year?
Yeah, so I think Probably the topic that I get the opportunity to share the most is creating need satisfying environments where everyone thrives. And when we talk about that, it allows us to explore the opportunity to create classroom environments where students can feel whole, seen, valued, and thrive, but then also lends itself to be thinking about, like, how can we create school environments where all the adults there feel whole, seen, and valued and thrive. And I know that I have books and work on school leaders, but that can't fall just on the shoulders of school leaders. We all have a responsibility to create a school environment where our colleagues can thrive, our students can thrive, our families can feel supported and a part of the learning process. And I do have a book that I wrote that was published in 2019, I think. That's called Through the Lens of Serendipity, helping others discover the best in themselves, even if life shows them its worst. And it's a journey just to really think about all of the relationships in school and how we can support people in discovering the best in themselves, being the best version of themselves, really engaging and learning alongside each other, regardless of what the relationship is. So we're looking, teacher to student, student to student, teacher to teacher, all our staff members, our families, all relationships are reciprocal, even school principals and staff. It's a reciprocal relationship. And as staff, if we think like, oh, our principal is responsible for building relationship with us, you're right, they are, but it can't just be one way. It's not going to be an authentic relationship unless it is a reciprocal relationship. So just thinking through all of those pieces. I am passionate about this and love it when I have the honor to kick off a school year with a district in this way. And I have several that I'll be traveling around this summer and helping them kick off. I can't believe it's the end of the school year and we're looking at 24, 25, and we're not even, we don't even have hover cars yet. I feel like
Back to the Future was not very conducive to
accurate.
What's going on now. Yeah, it's not accurate.
No, I feel cheated.
Yeah, right. We definitely thought that was going to happen. So, Allyson, definitely looking for folks to contact you. Obviously, I have your website on the screen, so they can definitely contact you via your website, but also through social media. And we'll talk about all the various ways people can connect with you. But highly suggest that you contact Allyson to have her come to your district to get things kicked off. I know Allyson does an amazing job when she speaks to really motivate and really make that connection for educators to kick off the school year. So super excited that you're able to do that, Allyson. And then I want to ask you a question I've asked you several times since you've been on the podcast, a couple different times through the duration. The podcast just turned 6. I don't know if you saw that, but
congratulations!
I know, it's crazy to think about. We're almost at 300 interviews. But you've answered this question before, but I love doing an actionable item, right? So for those who are listening, if they can do something tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you advise them to do? It's a big question, right?
I know. What's at the forefront of my mind with all of the challenges that school leaders are facing is the idea of being an ambassador of hope as one of your number one responsibilities. Like, if the school leader does not feel like we can take action today that's going to result in a better tomorrow, there's no way that the staff is going to feel that way or students will feel that way. So being an ambassador of hope means pausing, taking a breath, and recognizing that if you just bring light, energy, and focus to your interactions, that's enough. If that's all you're bringing that day, that's enough. And just really thinking about how we can help others feel hopeful. And Dr. Douglas Reeves, I get to work with a lot, and he always uses the word efficacious, that they feel like they can impact a better tomorrow. That's so important for all of us.
I love that so much. So, Allyson, how can folks connect with you on your website or on social media?
Yeah, just go to AllysonApsey.com if you know how to spell my name. My mom spelled it kind of funny. So, and then at Allyson Apsey, I try to keep it simple. All the social medias. My TikTok is at Allyson Apsey 19. But all the other social medias are just at Allyson Apsey. Or if you want to email me, it's AllysonApsey@gmail.com.
So TikTok, huh?
I know, much to my son's chagrin, they like cringe when I post one. I don't do dance numbers yet.
I
I think
heard
that
yet.
aged me that I just called it a dance number. Viral dance crazes. I haven't done them yet.
Well, I'm just gonna clip that right there and then push that to social media for everyone to tune into this beautiful interview with you. So so for those who are watching on YouTube, thank you so much. AllysonApsey.com is on the screen, so make sure that you go to her website. If you're on YouTube, I'd love for you to either subscribe to Joshua Stamper's page there or with the Teach Better channel. Obviously, both communities are growing and appreciate you liking and subscribing. If you're on a podcast player, of course, we would love for you to subscribe to Aspire to Lead. And then, in the show notes, we'll have all the links for Allyson and her books, her website, and of course, all of her social media, and specifically TikTok for her dance moves. And I hope that you take advantage of Allyson because, she was raving at the beginning as far as being a learner, but she is also one that has given so much wisdom and insight into my own life and to so many educators around the country and around the world. So please connect with her, tap into all of the wonderful resources that she provides educational leaders. And I guarantee that you will be a better educator, leader, and person for it. And Allyson, with that, I just want to thank you so much for not only the work that you're doing that's so impactful, but for being such an amazing person and being a wonderful guest on Aspire to Lead.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a joy to spend any time I get to spend with you. So I so appreciate this.